Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hey everyone, welcome to Driving the Line. I'm Mike Bohan. I've got Kenny Ray and Jim Seibert in here with me as well. And we are glad to be with you today and talk a little truck safety. It's good to see you guys. You're looking well as usual. How's everybody doing today?
Doing good, brother.
Doing well.
Good. Before we get into kind of the meat of our safety topics today, which is going to be the CVSA's annual Roadcheck, we wanted to let you as our listeners in on a little conversation we've been having just amongst the three of us lately. And I know Jim and Kenny and I all share a passion for continued learning and self-improvement. And in our line of work, sometimes that's very structured and sometimes it's just on our own, the learning that we do. So we thought it would be interesting to share with you all a book recommendation. Each of us are going to provide you just a recommendation of a book we've read that we thought was interesting, that we learned something from, that impacted us in some way, or maybe it was just a book that we thought was just enjoyable to read. So we've each got one. I'm going to start us off. We'll have Jim on deck to give his, and we'll shoot over to Kenny. So to set my recommendation up, several years ago, I was at a leadership symposium in Omaha, Nebraska, that was hosted by Great West Casualty Company. And every year they bring in a really great keynote speaker. And this particular year, Michael Durant was one of the speakers. So if you've ever read Mark Bowden's book, Black Hawk Down, or you've seen that movie, or you just remember the news from back in the early 90s, you'll recognize Michael Durant's name as the Black Hawk helicopter pilot that was shot down over Mogadishu and captured. So he wrote a book called In the Company of Heroes. And this is his story. It's his words through his eyes. And it's just his account of being shot down, what his injuries were, what it was like being a prisoner of war, how he coped with all of that, and ultimately his release, how he was released from his captors. So it's a great read. Some of it's a little hard to read because he doesn't pull any punches about the brutality of war and what he went through during this time, but it's very real, and I like that. So highly recommend. It gives you an insight into his toughness, both mentally and physically, and then also what it just means to lay down your life for a brother. So good read, highly recommend. In the Company of Heroes by Michael Durant. Check it out. And Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. I'm about 2 or 3 pages in to a book called Devil at My Heels by Louis Zamperini and David Renson. It's a story of a World War II hero, spent 47 days adrift and more than 2 years as a POW. And Mr. Zamperini was also on the 1936 U.S. Olympic team. So the epic saga of torment and survival and forgiveness. And so far, it's proven to be a pretty good read.
Man, I love both of those recommendations y'all made. Great books. Mine's a little different, from a different genre. It's a book called Quiet, Q-U-I-E-T, by Susan Cain. Susan Cain was a Harvard-trained attorney who got into law practice and realized she didn't like being a lawyer. But she's brilliantly smart. And she started trying to figure out why she didn't enjoy law. And she came to the conclusion that it had to do with her introvertedness. And she began studying the difference between introverts and extroverts. And she found through some very documented research that anywhere between 30 and 40% of the U.S. population are introverts. And so this book talks about, in a very, it's not a real scientific book. It's a very good read. And for people that travel a lot, I'd encourage you to get the book on tape or the book on CD. She actually narrates that. She's a very good speaker, but it talks about the difference between introverts and extroverts and why it's important, I think, for us in the safety world. We've got a lot of safety directors and owners of trucking companies that listen to this podcast, and you need to realize that 30 to 40% of your employees are introverts, even if you're an extrovert. And those folks have a tremendous amount of contributions to make to your organization. Don't be trying to change them. That's the way they're programmed. And this is a good read. For an introvert, it will confirm their identity to themselves and to the world. And for extroverts, it'll give you a glimpse into how to deal with your more introverted colleagues, family members, and friends. So Quiet by Susan Cain is my recommendation, Mike.
Excellent. Guys, I really, and I mean this, I'm going to grab both those. I haven't read either one of them, but I'm going to grab them both for sure. I've got a stack of books here that I'm trying to get through, but I'm going to add those to it for sure. But well, let's jump into this episode's main topic, which is the CVSA's upcoming International Road Check. And Kenny, I know when you and Jim and I were talking earlier this week, you had mentioned something I thought was very interesting. You said you were still a Texas State Trooper when the first road check happened.
Absolutely. All the way back to 1991. This is the 32nd year of road check, and I was there for the very first one.
So you've been in one way or another in this industry. You've seen each one of these road checks come about because they happen every year.
Yep, absolutely.
So in your history with this event that CVSA is putting on every year, share with us, what is this thing that we come in this industry just to call road check? What is this for our listeners? Just kind of give them an overview of what we're dealing with here.
You know, Mike, every year CVSA carves out a 3-day period, 72 hours, where they dedicate roadside inspections. They highly publicize it. They pick focus areas every year, which is one change that has happened over the past 32 years. But this year, it's going to be May 16th, 17th, and 18th. And basically what will happen at midnight on May 16th, all of the scales across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico will open. And each state does it a little different. Some states dedicate to 72 continuous hours, which means that if the scales normally close at 5 or 6 in the evening, those states, they'll be open at 2 a.m. They literally will run 72 hours. Other states will keep their scale hours the same, but they'll have roving patrol units out in the dead of night. But it's a 3-day inspection blitz, a 3-day inspection focus. And this year they're focusing on anti-lock brake systems, or ABS, and cargo securement. And a couple of things different, Mike and Jim, from when inspections are normally held. There's two that I distinctively remember, and then I want to share a couple of other things with it, and I'll bounce it back to you. But the inspections will primarily be level ones, and we've done an episode already on the podcast of the different inspections. But the level one, if you remember, that's the full meal deal. That means from the front bumper to the back bumper of a commercial motor vehicle is going to be inspected, including there'll either be a trooper or an inspector on a creeper underneath it, checking brakes, push rod travel, frames, things like that, or they'll have you pull over a pit and an inspector will be under it, but it'll be the full meal deal. If you get stopped by a road trooper, it's probably going to be a level 2 because there is a safety concern that troopers are not supposed to get under a vehicle if they're by themselves for their own safety, but all of the inspections will be level 1s or level 2s. And just to give you a perspective on the enormity of this event, we can look at stats from previous years, and I'll just share with you real briefly from last year. During this 72-hour period, 3 days last year, almost 60,000 trucks were inspected, 59,026. That comes out to a little under 20,000 a day. 19,675 a day, which is 819 trucks per hour. That's around the clock, 24 hours a day, which means that there's about 14 trucks being inspected every minute of this. So just to let you know that a lot of trucks are going to be checked over this 3-day period. And there's two things that the inspectors do that it deviates just a little bit from the norm. And I think it's important we talk about these two things for just a second. And Mike, you feel free to add anything you want to here. A lot of times, if a trooper will stop a truck and inspect the truck and inspect the driver, and finds 3 or 4 or 5 violations on it, whatever they are. They'll always write up the roadside inspection. They'll always list those violations. But the trooper doesn't always issue a ticket along with that roadside inspection. And what I mean by when I use the term ticket, and y'all know I'm in Texas, the language varies a little bit. Some states call it citations, or a summons. But you know that in addition to getting the violations on the roadside inspection report, which obviously carry CSA points and have ramifications for the motor carrier, but a ticket denotes, hey, you've got to contact a court. You've now been issued something in addition to the roadside inspection. You got to call a judge. There may be a fine associated with this. And the point I want to make is during Roadcheck, a lot of tickets get written, particularly for those focus areas, the anti-lock brake systems and cargo securement. So my point is, let's say a truck rolls into the scales and they have an ABS issue or they have a load securement issue. Well, they're going to get a roadside inspection and they'll get the roadside inspection report. But at the end of that trooper may turn to them and say, sir, in addition to this roadside inspection report, you're going to need to contact, Judge Smith at the county courthouse, and you have X number of days to do that. So my point is there's going to be some tickets or citations or summons issued in addition to the roadside inspections. The other thing that's different, so the one thing that's different is the tickets. The other one is there'll be none of what we call brother-in-law and on the out of service violations. If you're placed out of service, they're going to put a red out of service sticker on the windshield, and that truck is not leaving that scale location unless it's on the back end of a wrecker or you have road service come out and do the repairs. My point is they hold the feet to the fire on the out of service. And y'all know I'm a retired trooper. We had a policy. We didn't let really junky, really, really dangerous trucks go down the road. But if we stopped somebody, even if it had an out of service criteria, but it wasn't something that was just an imminent hazard right then, and say they were 25 or 30 miles from their yard, a lot of times we'd tell that driver, hey, I'm putting you out of service, but I'm going to let you drive down to your yard. Or if it was close, we would follow them to the yard. My point is there was a little bit of leeway, a discretion, if you will, that was given to the officer at the time. There'll be none of that during Roadcheck. If you're out of service, you're going to be out of service, and they're going to fix it right there on the spot. And Mike, before I leave, talking about those stats, I do want to share with you one other thing. Of those 59,000 inspections that were conducted last year, about 12,500 of them resulted in out of service on the vehicle, which is about 21%. Now, we throw percentiles out, and a lot of times people say, well, what does that mean? That means 1 out of every 5 trucks that pulled into the scales got put out of service. And on drivers, there was about 3,700 drivers, which represents 6% that were placed out of service last year. And what's interesting about that is CVSA and FMCSA, all the regulatory folks, publicize Roadcheck for months ahead. Here we are in the month of May, and Roadcheck's been being publicized since January. So that's one reason the enforcement community doesn't really have any heartburn over putting people out of service and writing tickets, because they've been publicizing this event for months ahead of when it occurs, which still surprises me that somebody would roll into the scales with an out of service criteria or out of service item on their truck, knowing that they're going to get inspected during this time. And one last thing, and then I will stop. You mentioned about the historical. Back in 1991, on the first one, we didn't really know what we were doing. I mean, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety regulations mix out, that was still all relatively new. We'd only been doing it a couple of years. And then they came out with this program in 91, and, trucks would drive in and the drivers really didn't know what to expect. And we didn't really know what to expect. It was the first time we'd ever been given the decals, the CVSA decals to give for a clean roadside inspection. We didn't know which corners to tear off, where to put them on the windshield. It was kind of a learning deal. But this whole thing moving forward, it has really evolved now into, again, where it's very highly publicized thanks to social media. They have these focus areas which I know you're going to talk about in just a second. And we've got to the point where, that the fact that tickets and out of service feet are held to the fire has become a new reality. The one good thing that has happened over the past 32 years, I mentioned that out of service rate of 21%. I went back and checked. In 1991, it was 35%, which basically means 1 out of every 3 trucks that rolled into the scales we put out of service back then. So the out of service rate has steadily dropped on vehicles. So that's an encouraging thing in and of itself. But again, May 16th, 17th, 18th, 72 hours, they're going to be checking the trucks from front bumper to back bumper and specifically looking at anti-lock brake systems and cargo securement.
Yeah, and Kenny, you mentioned that out of service rate dropping, and that's kind of the goal. The FMCSA, CVSA, these regulatory bodies, they're not doing this to pick on anybody. Their goal is roadway safety, highway safety. That's what they're after. As we look at the stats and we see the out of service rates or maybe the violation rates go down, that means hopefully that we've got safer trucks out there on the road, safer drivers out there on the road, and that's what it's for. And as you were talking about the inspections, what the focus areas are, they're kind of giving us the answers to the test. They publicize this in advance. We know it's coming as an industry, but one of the things that you alluded to, and I want to make sure that our listeners know, is during this road check, there's a couple of focus areas that I'm going to give you some info on here, but they're going to inspect that truck and they're going to inspect that driver. It's not like they're just going to pull the truck over and look at the focus areas. They're going to do a full inspection. If they're doing a level 1 or that level 2, if they're roadside. So the driver has to be prepared and the truck needs to be mechanically sound in all areas, not just the focus areas that I'm getting ready to cover here in just a second. So it's important that you know that. So we know that we need to be prepared, but it's more than just these 2 focus areas that I'm going to go over. And Kenny mentioned these. We got the anti-lock brake systems or the ABS systems. That's one of the areas that they're going to look at. And then the cargo securement, that's another area they're going to look at. Now, the ABS systems, there's no out of service violations that correlate with the ABS systems, but it's an extremely important part of the truck safety because it's going to keep the wheels from locking up or skidding and help that driver keep control of his vehicle. So that's one of the areas they're going to look at in the cargo securement. One of the stats on that was that last year, improper or inadequate cargo securement accounted for 10.6% of the vehicle out of service violations. So what they do is they take a look at previous years and say, well, where did we have our violations? Where were some issues? And they're going to add that to the focus areas the next year. And that's what they've done this year. A couple of documents that I want you guys, as our listeners, to know you have available to you. And you can find these at www.roadcheck.org or just go to the CVSA's website and you'll find these. One of them is a North American Standard Roadside Inspection Vehicle cheat sheet. And it goes through brakes, coupling devices, fuel, exhaust systems, all that stuff. And it shows you kind of what the roadside inspection is going to be like. And I know Kenny mentioned we'd had a podcast about that before, but that's a good 1-page document that you can provide to your drivers that you can utilize for your fleet, for those in the office. Highly recommend you guys go download that, get the PDF copy of it. The other thing I want to tell you to get is there is a 1-page just International Road Check 2023, and it gives you the focus areas. You can download this. It's 1 page, and everything that I'm going to go over here real quick is on this document. And again, I would highly recommend that you go get that because we've got the ability to have this information prior to the road check coming. So if you're having driver meetings, if you have, tailgate talks, if you want to talk to your operations folks, this is a great tool to utilize. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. You go in, you print this out, you hold your meeting with your company, and it gives you a document that not only you can go over with them, but you can provide to them that can take it with them. So I do want to point out during the road check, inspectors, when they're stopping, as far as the ABS systems go, they're going to do a couple of things when they do the inspection. They're going to determine whether the vehicle that's stopped is required to have an ABS system. And again, you can find this in the regulations in 393.55, 393.55. This is going to give you this information. Another thing the inspectors are going to do is make sure that the ABS lamps are cycling on and off during the diagnostics checks. And then they're going to check for any malfunctions in the ABS system. And they'll look at that. Like if the lamp's continuously running down the road, they're going to know there's some kind of malfunction with the ABS system. So those are things they're going to look at in the ABS system. But if you want information about that from the regulations, 393.55. Now, when they're looking at load securement, and up front, where you're going to find this in the regulations, it's going to start in 393.100, and then 393.116 is where you're going to find some of those commodity specific load securement regulations. But what they're going to be looking at is to make sure that, you know, your loads, your cargo dunnage, anything that's on that truck or on that trailer is secured from falling on the road, from blowing out, from spilling or leaking on the roadway. And this is going to include things even like spare tires on the you know, if you've got a spare tire that's kind of tucked in that little cubby on the trailer and it's not secured properly, that's going to be a load securement violation. They're going to write that up for sure. The inspectors are going to confirm you've got enough tie downs, you've got the proper tie downs, that they're not damaged in any way. So they're going to be looking at straps to make sure they're not cut, worn, anything like that. The chains, we don't have links with bends in them or something like that. They're going to be looking at anchor points, making sure there's some structural damage there, and everything looks good. And then they're going to verify some of those commodity specific cargo requirements that's in accordance with the starting at 393.116. That's where the commodity specific stuff is. So that's what they're going to be looking at. And again, these two documents that I'm talking about, go to www.roadcheck.org. You'll find them on there. Highly recommend you download those. It's a good way to begin to prep your company for Roadcheck. And guys, I'm just going to open it up to you. When we're talking to everybody who's listening to us right now through this podcast, obviously like I said before, we've got the answers to the test. We know what they're going to be looking at. How do we prep for this? What's the next step for our listeners in getting ready for Roadcheck 23?
The CVSA has provided 7 expert tips to prepare for this road check. And the number one item on their list is stay on top of vehicle maintenance. So during these vehicle inspections, we know that we're going to be inspected by CVSA certified enforcement inspectors, right? Back in January, they gave us the key to the test, which is they're going to be looking at brake systems, cargo securement. Those are their priorities of effort, so to speak. Since we know those areas and realize that staying on top of vehicle maintenance is the number one item recommended by them, our shop supervisors should really be developing their own checklists in preparation and asking themselves a few questions like, where do we need to catch up with our maintenance program? What pushback PMs still linger and we need to move those to the forefront? What documentation are my operators that are going to be involved in the inspection? What do they need to have that my shop provides? Also in preparation, through the years, we've been able to anticipate heavy use items, right? We've got those in our PMCS, our maintenance logs. We're able to track those things. We're doing the same thing right now in preparation. When I'm conducting our shop maintenance, what are heavy use wearable items that we're going to need on hand to get our fleet ready to be out on the road during this time? What services does my shop not provide that I'm going to need to outsource? And realize that in this time, I'm going to be competing with maybe other companies for that outsourced shop's time. And I'm also going to be competing with vendors that are going to be providing the parts. So what parts, what services do I need to have laid on and ready to execute for this robust maintenance streak that we need to be on top of getting the roads back out there? And then the final question that I think is important here is, how do we maximize our time in the shop? It reminds me of my time in the service. Our fleets, our vehicles We had a maintenance shop with a chief warrant officer and a senior NCO that were in charge of maintenance on all vehicles. But the operator, those that held the license, were also a part of this. Conducting things like maintenance lanes was very important to success of our mission and completing that mission in a safe way. Those maintenance lanes, individuals were trained up and they handled specific items on a vehicle. And they would go from lane to lane to lane until it got a clear check at the end. And so as we go into this season, this road check, if I'm the maintenance supervisor, the PMCS, the documentation, what do my drivers need from me? And how do I get ahead on making sure that we've got the parts, the labor, and anything that needs to be outsourced lined up?
You know, Jim, I'm tickled to death when you talk about what we got to do on preventative maintenance, because Mike and I both know from having done thousands of roadside inspections that the key to a clean roadside inspection, and again, we've talked about this in a previous episode, and it's the key to Roadcheck, is the combination of a driver doing a proper pre-trip and post-trip, they doing their part, and then the shops fixing the things that need to be fixed on the truck. And it's a combination effort. It can't be solely placed on the responsibility of the driver, and it can't be solely placed on the responsibility of the shop. It's a combination of both of those things. And you know, while you were talking about the shop and the shop supervisors making sure they got everything they need, you know, when they're going over that truck, and I was thinking about what Mike was talking about on load securement. That's a good time as well, particularly when those trailers are in the shop. You know, let's check the chains, let's check straps, because those it's not just do we have enough load securement, do we have the proper kind, or the chains the right kind, and you know, are they in good shape? And Mike, you brought up something I think is so important. This is more, load securement is more than just a flatbed operation. They're going to be opening the doors on dry box vans and making sure that pallets haven't shifted around and that load locks are being used. And they're going to be looking at dump trucks, making sure that they got tarps on loads and they're not spilling stuff going down the highway. So it's very, very comprehensive. But I love the fact that you guys have brought up this collaborative relationship between the shop and the drivers and getting ready for these roadside inspections.
Yeah, it's definitely a team effort when it comes to being successful in your maintenance program. And that's one of the things I don't know if I'm the only one in this group that has done this, but I remember when I was a kid and I was in school, there were times when I studied a certain topic to pass a test. I didn't really study to learn something. I just studied because I wanted to pass a test. And I kind of think about Roadcheck like that. And what I want to steer our listeners away from is getting your fleet in shape to pass a 72-hour road test and then forget about maintenance for the rest of the year. We certainly don't want to do that. What we want is a robust, meaningful maintenance program that goes 12 months out of the year. And this is this is a test we got to pass. We got our 72-hour road check here, but we certainly want this to be something, the things that we're talking about, the things that Jim outlined there, we want that for you all to go completely throughout the year.
Well said. Yep.
And I know a lot of you are doing that. And I just want to encourage you all to continue to do that because it's very important to keep your trucks in safe operating conditions. So, well, gentlemen, unless you've got anything else, I think we're going to move on. Once again, we want to thank everybody for joining us. We truly do appreciate you guys listening in. And remember to check out that CVSA's website. There's some great information on there. I do want to remind you all of that. Not only about the upcoming road check, but they've got some good information on there about other things as well. So, and again, don't ever hesitate to reach out to one of your risk consultants if you've got more questions about the road check or anything related to transportation safety. So until next time, tune in. With us is Kenny, and Jim and I will be discussing how to stay cool when the weather starts to heat up. So until then, stay safe, and we'll see you next time on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, The Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.